Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to set up the PowerShield governance feature, which is a new feature released as part of Copilot Studio Kit April release. This is basically helps organizations manage the Power Platform connector access through the DLP policies. This is episode one of a three-part series. So today we'll mainly focus on installation and configuration. In the episode two, I'll walk you through the maker workflow, and in the last episode, I'll be covering the admin workflow. Okay, so let's get started. So first, let's understand what is PowerShield. So as mentioned, right, PowerShield is part of Copilot Studio Kit from Microsoft CAT team. It provides a structured approval-based workflow for connector governance. So let's understand by going through this diagram. Um, so the problem statement, right? Let's take two personas, David and Mary. So let's say without PowerShield, the first scenario, let's say David is a maker. So there is a demo coming up next week for David, and for that, right, he need to build a Copilot Studio agent, and where he would need this WorkIQ Copilot MCP connector, and unfortunately, the connector was unavailable at that point of time. So now David, right, he needs to find out who would be the admin contact who can enable the connector. So for that, first he needs to find out the contact and then start the conversation and so initiate the request. Um, so now on the other hand, Mary, who is an administrator, takes care of the governance. So receive the request from David, and then so once Mary wants to grant the access to the connector, Mary needs to log into the admin center and the create DLP policy. And the policy, she needs to manually include the environment where David needs access on that connector. And then she has to do all the configurations, and finally she has to create the DLP policy. Okay, as you see, this is a manual process and error prone, and also there's no real audit trail or audit history for that. Um, the same scenario, right? How this can be enhanced with the PowerShield. So now with the PowerShield, PowerShield being a application which would be accessed by both David and Mary. So David simply come open the PowerShield and fill the details as part of the request. So David would fill in which environments he would need the connector access, and so what are the actions in the connector he would want access for, and also if any custom actions, right, required, all these things David can fill in with justification, and any artifacts David can attach to the request. So now once that request gets submitted, a notification would send out to all the administrators in the organization, and Mary being one of the admin, Mary received the notification, and then Mary simply open that PowerShield application, open the request, and then so Mary can ask back and forth the conversation in form of comments, and then finally when Mary feels everything is fine, Mary can go ahead and approve that request in the PowerShield app. Now all the DLP policy creation and everything, right, would gets automated. So and with all the audit trial and everything. So that's what the PowerShield is meant for. It is for yeah, it is for structured approval based workflow for data loss prevention policies, and for granting Power Platform connector access. Okay, yeah, hope you have some context, and now let's get started. So as I mentioned, right, this video will just I'll be covering the configuration and setup process, and then in the next two videos I'll really walk you through through different scenarios. Yeah, and now how you can install the latest the PowerShield, right? I'm sure most of you are familiar with Copilot Studio Kit. One option is you can go through the releases and get the latest release, which was released like 3 days back, and then you can install this managed solution on your environment. Now the second option is that installing from the marketplace. So you can go to the marketplace. I'll be sharing these links. You can simply say get it now and then pick the environment, and that's how you can install it. In the interest of time, right, I've already installed the solution, the latest solution, on my environment, and the environment name is test. Um, and if you see the version, right, the version is the 2026 April 30. This is the latest last release of the Copilot Studio Kit. Okay, so now let's quickly see what components this latest solution has. And if you notice, right, primarily I'm on the apps screen. So previously, right, we used to have this model-driven app, and this is where users would go and access all the features of Copilot Studio Kit. Now in this release, the team has introduced two more apps. These are like code apps. Okay, yeah, and so this is where the PowerShell would be part of uh, that Maker can open. Maker can open this code app, or Maker can also open just this model-driven app, and they can start initiation of requests. So we'll see that in detail in the next videos. But yeah, let's focus on the configuration part. Okay, I'm going through the going back to the documentation again. Okay, yeah, you can find this documentation available, and then go to PowerShell. Um, So what are the prerequisites, right? So the prerequisites anyway, so we completed the installation of Copilot Studio Kit and also the security roles. Yeah, to access, right, user need to have these security roles, either CSK maker or administrator. I'll cover in detail again these things when I'm giving a walkthrough of the app. But for now, in terms of configuration setup, right, let's complete few things. Uh, okay, so the first thing is that we need to provide the tenant ID into an environment variable. So for that, um, let's go to the default solution and environment variables. Um, and the environment variable name is PowerShell tenant ID. Okay, let's get to it. Um, yeah, in the upcoming releases, right, we will try to automate this setup process, but for now, yeah, it has to be manual. Um, okay, I'm going to the environment variables, and then let's okay, so let's look for PowerShell tenant ID, um, and let's give a new value. How do we give the value? I'm getting it from the session details. Oh, I'm copying the tenant ID. Okay, yeah, let's give the new value. We can remove the default value or keep it. Doesn't matter. All right, we have completed the step one, which is setting the tenant ID into the environment variable, and the next thing is setting up the connection references. So PowerShell requires four connectors. So one is that API flow and BAP API flow, and the data version makers. So let's go one by one. And if you're wondering why would we need these two connectors, right? So the architecture of the PowerShell is it go and get all the connectors, right, part of the tenant every day. So every day it'll go and fetch if any new connectors added as per in the tenant, the Power Platform tenant, and then it'll refresh that, get those details, and refresh one of the database tables. And similarly, there is this whenever we approve a request, admin approve a request, right? So we need to automate the process. So which means we would be creating the DLP policies, and also we would be creating the patterns and the connector actions. We would be configuring all those things, right? So for that, we would need this BAP API connector. Okay, so let's get started. Let's start with the API flow. Okay, so both API flow and BAP API, it requires HTTP with Microsoft Entra, the pre-authorized. Um, so let's create that. Okay, uh, let's go and create a new one. And we need to set up the base resource URL and Entra ID. Actually, the details are provided here. You can copy paste the details. Okay, so we were here, the base source URL, and the next one is okay, so then go ahead and say create, and then it would ask us to authenticate and give the consent. Okay, so now the connection has been configured, and now if I refresh, okay, so set this connector and save. Okay, so move to the next one and create a new connection, and for that let's copy um, okay, so copy the base URL and then copy the next URL. So come back and refresh, and you should see the connector and save. Okay, so similarly, we need to configure data version as well as Power Apps for Makers connectors. I'll be pausing and I'll be configuring those two and come back. Okay, so I went ahead and created all the four connectors, Dataverse as well as Power Apps for Makers, and these two, the API flow and also API.bap, this connector. And if I go back all the connectors, um, okay, so the connection references have been properly configured with the connections. Okay, so just to summarize, right, so far we have configured that environment variable with the tenant ID, and also we have configured all the four connection references. The next step is that the PowerShell comes up with these three cloud flows. So because the connection references were not configured earlier, so those would be in a turn off status. We need to turn them on one by one. Let me select this. Okay, so I went ahead and turn on all these three flows. Okay, now we're good. So the next thing, as I kind of mentioned, right, the PowerShield architecture, it would pull all the Power Platform connector and connector action details, right, on a day-to-day basis, and it'll query the Power Platform tenant level API and get the connector and connector action details and populate the tables. So before we start anything, right, in the PowerShield, so there are two tables, important tables. One is that the PowerShell connector and PowerShell connector action. So consider this as like metadata tables, uh, and if you see right there, the values are getting populated. This is because I just turned on the cloud flows just now, and let me take you to. Okay, so let me take you to the table, and okay, so let me refresh, and if you see, these are all getting created now as we speak. That's because uh, the 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 PowerShield sync connectors for Cloudflow has been activated. So which means in the behind the scenes it would go and run immediately. Okay, so if you see right, this Cloudflow PowerShield sync connectors, it's initiated 3 minutes ago because that's when we activated the Cloudflow. So if I go into the details, you would see. Okay, so if you see the flow is still running, and uh, I mean, if you're interested, right, what it is doing, it is calling that the get connectors action, and then it is populating the PowerShield connectors table. Okay, so it is populating that the PowerShield connectors table, and basically it is calling a unbound action behind the scenes, so that eventually populate the table. Okay, so now let's go and keep refreshing, and let me add the created on. Okay, so let me add a few more things. Okay, if you see the last synced was this AIHW and all, and let me keep refreshing. So yeah, you keep seeing the new connectors keep on adding. And a few things, right? See, by default, the approach what we have taken, right? We would be, let me also add, let me hide this thing. Okay, let me add, so the publisher. Okay, so now the approach what we have taken, right? See, by default, um, uh, we would be blocking all the connectors except the ones published by Microsoft. So that's why, right, the block by admin flag has been set for all the non-Microsoft publisher connectors. This is like the this has been done intentionally. And in the next video, when I'm giving a admin persona demonstration, right, I would show you that how you can activate, deactivate, I mean, how you can block or unblock a particular connectors. Yeah, but otherwise, just keep in mind that by default, only the Microsoft Publisher connectors um, would be available, and the rest of the connectors would be blocked. Okay, just give it some more time because usually it takes like a 9 to 10 minutes. The Cloudflow, the typical time it would take. Okay, so if you see right, this PowerShell sync connectors flow completed, and it took around 8 minutes 22 seconds. So which means our PowerShell connectors table has all the connector information. And as you see, right, this Cloudflow is a scheduled flow, which means it runs every day, and then it will do the delta, which means if there are any connectors have been added or modified, so it would update this PowerShell connectors table on a day-to-day basis. Okay, and moving to the next important flow, which is connector actions. Okay, let's go and okay, and if you see right, this has been this ran already, and it just ran for 41 seconds. So because this connector actions, right, sync connector actions are dependent on connectors, it needs to rerun. It needs to be run again. Let me run this. Okay, okay. So now if you see this flow, sync connector actions, it would go and populate the table connector actions, PowerShell connector actions. So if I refresh, right, and if you know the connector and connector action, so basically connector is it's like a connector metadata, and actions are like all the API endpoints. And if you see, for example, this connector abstract time zones has all this actions, get current time and all. Okay, so this flow also it would take around the same time. Um, okay, just wait for it to complete. Okay, so once those two flows activated and ran for the first time, and we are done with all the configurations and prerequisites, the next thing is that role assignment. Like we have the same CSK maker and CSK administrator roles work for the PowerShell maker and PowerShell administrator. You can go through the documents what each role person can be, what can they do. But one important thing, right, as highlighted here, so the CSK administrator role, which is a Dataverse role, for a person uh, who wants to be a CSK administrator, right? The person needs to be a Power Platform administrator role, Power Platform administrator, because that user would be approving that the policy request, and which means there are at the tenant level this DLP policy gets created and or modified. So for that, along with the CSK administrator role, which is a Dataverse role, the person must be the Power Platform administrator. Okay, so once you have all these things, right, the next thing is that launch options. As I mentioned, PowerShell is accessible from 3 apps, so you can use the model-driven app, which is the app right in the Copilot Studio Kit in the past releases, and these are the two code apps have been introduced in this release. Okay, so for our demo, I think see the purpose of first video is just that installing and completing all the prerequisites. Okay, so I'll be stopping here, and in the coming 2 videos, I'll be covering that I'll be walking you through the apps and how one can create the request and how an admin can approve the request.